Morning to you. I'm Jeff Slickey, and we got some great guests in studio today. We got Mason County Sheriff Casey Salisbury, in addition from the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, Brian Fairbanks. Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming on the air with me today. Casey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Please introduce me to your guest here.
Well, I find it much more interesting each week to have somebody other than myself on here that has something going on with us in the county, or one of our organizations that we work very closely with in Mason County is the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And this is Brian Fairbanks. He's a sergeant from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I thought we'd talk a little bit today, start off with a little bit of hunting season. There's a lot of things going on right now.
Well, tell us a little bit about this. Is it just kind of getting underway? Are you seeing a lot more people out there than you have in years past? Or tell us about the hunting season.
Well, we're about halfway into the hunting season. Most of them go up in through November. As far as numbers, it really depends on the location of the area. I will say that I'm new to Mason, Thurston County. I've only been down here since March, so I don't have a lot to compare it to in years past. But I am hearing in some of the areas that there are high numbers of people. And a lot of that has to do with there are some areas where you now have to have permits to paid permits to go in and hunt, and the only ones that can be in there are those permit holders. Therefore, people who have traditionally hunted those areas in the past now have to find somewhere else to go, and so it's concentrating people in certain areas, where other areas, when they have the permits, it's not so concentrated. So we are running into some issues. What happens when you start concentrating people in a smaller area? People need to find places to go, and they're looking for places where it's not so crowded, which does run into some issues. I just recently located down here from Skagit County. We had the same issues up there. One of our number one calls for service this time of year is folks that are looking for places to hunt, going onto people's property that they don't have permission to be there.
How do you know if you're a hunter? First off, is hunting ebb and flow with the economy, or is that kind of something? Do you see more people hunting maybe now that the economy's getting better, people are able to get out there more, or is it kind of an insulated?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It does ebb and flow with the economy. And right now the economy's doing pretty well. So we're getting a lot of people out in the field. If you think back, what's it been, 6, 8, 9 years ago when gas prices were $4 a gallon. Sure. At that time I was located out in the West Clallam County, and our numbers just dropped. It was very expensive to go out there. So it does. Economy is one thing, absolutely.
So then when they have to go out and buy permits, how do hunters know if they're on public land or private land? Oftentimes they're very close to each other too. You don't really know the barriers.
Well, we do place that burden on the hunter.
Okay.
Any hunter that's was born after 1972 was required to go through a hunter education class. We spend a lot of time in that class talking about private property rights and knowing and putting the burden on them to know whose property there are. There's a number of different ways. There is no real good single map out there. So it would be up to the hunter to research and find out whose property they're on. You can do it through county assessor sites. They're starting to get to be some GPS units that have county parcels on them, game management units on them.
Okay.
So it's up to them. They have to, many of the companies, if we're talking about private timber companies, post their properties on most of their roads. So there's a number of different sources, but it would be up to that individual to figure out whose property they're on and whether they have permission to be there.
When you go on, Casey?
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of our mutual things that we have to deal with Fish and Wildlife. Is we get calls from people saying somebody owns a big field or big piece of property, wooded area, and they get people in there hunting, and they go back, and oftentimes they try to approach them as best you can when somebody else is armed or don't want to do that, and call the sheriff's office and ask us to go out and make contact with people in the middle of the woods. Well, the challenge is when you're a little ways away in the first place, by the time you get there, most people don't sit and wait for you in the middle of the woods to show up. And so they come on and off the property, and people get very frustrated with that. And it is up to the person hunting to know whose land they're on. And it can be challenging where you come out of the woods. But we've had recently people continuing to return to the same property after the landowners. And the other thing that happens oftentimes is they find a gate that they don't like there on private property, and they push it over with their truck or pull it out with a winch or just drive right through the middle of somebody's field. And it becomes very frustrating for the landowners too, because if somebody's shooting on the backside of their property and it's coming out, near their residence or things, those are the kind of things that we get mutual calls to. Is
Fish and Wildlife allowed to go on the private property, or is that something you have to give to the sheriff to go take a look at?
Well, Fish and Wildlife has, in the course of our duties, we don't have a right to trespass ourselves. No, but if we get a call for service and the landowner wants us to go investigate somebody on their property, well, absolutely, we're there by permission.
Mm-hmm. They have general law enforcement authority.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do have the same authority as a deputy sheriff. Same academy, same general authority, same arrest authority. We do have, because of this trespass while hunting is such an issue this time of year. It's been a number of years now. 4, 5, 6 years, we actually had to go out and pass our own statute. In addition to
That's okay.
It
happens.
That's okay. You want to take it? You got it?
Oh, it's okay. There is a general trespass statute. But we also in Fish and Wildlife have a separate statute specifically for hunters.
Okay.
And it's called trespass while hunting. And the reason that we ended up passing this additional statute for us is because we were finding that individuals would be it was worth their while to trespass on somebody's property to go after that trophy animal. Mm-hmm. And so they were more than willing to pay out a $250 fine to go out and get that big bull elk. And there was nothing in place that would, because we had an open season and they were hunting under an open season with a lawful tag, there was nothing we could do about actually seizing that animal. So they're more than willing to trespass or tear down a gate and go hunt.
Sure.
The deterrent wasn't high enough.
Yeah. So now under our hunting while trespass statute, we can suspend or revoke their hunting privileges for 2 years, and we also can seize that animal.
Have you guys done that yet?
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. It's it happens all the time this time of year. Depending on the circumstances, of course, every case is different. But if you find somebody that's just willfully, going on somebody's property to take an animal, knowing that I'll just pay the fine, I'll get to keep my critter.
Sure.
It's still worth it to them. So.
Yeah. I think another one of the challenges that we both face, and it's not uncommon for sheriff's offices, especially in rural areas, or Department of Wildlife officers. Again, it goes back to the areas of land mass that you have to cover with a few people. We have other calls for service aside from that. The wildlife officers specialize in game issues. Certainly, I think that recently I had a homeowner call the sheriff's office and want us to remove a dead animal from their property. It was just found literally in their yard, a dead deer. And we're more than willing to go do that when we have time to get out there for that. But that's not necessarily our first priority if we've got something else going on. I was able to call one of the guys that works for the sergeant and ask him about that and say, well, I can go out and remove that. What is interesting, his comment on that, and I don't think people think about that, was that, well, we'd still rather, it might be tomorrow before we get there, but we would rather remove that animal ourselves for the reason that we like to kind of research how that animal died. Was it shot? Did it get into something? Is it diseased? It gives them an idea of the population in their area, what might be happening. It might be an indicator of what's happening in that area if they see it more than once. And so with that specialty, to be able to go out and do that, and it keeps them informed on what's happening to wildlife in their particular area that they patrol.
What must hunters have on them when they're out hunting, and what are some fines associated with not having the proper paperwork, proper tags, or whatever? I'm not really sure what they need to have on them when they're out in the hunt.
It would depend on the hunt.
Okay.
We have archery seasons, we have muzzleloader seasons, and we have modern firearm seasons. Right now, we're currently in the middle of our modern firearm deer season. So when we're talking about modern firearm seasons, we do require the mandatory 400 square inches of hunter orange.
Okay.
Where an archer or a muzzleloader would not be required to have that. So the equipment is one thing. It has to meet statute, but it's going to vary from each method. Archery, muzzleloader, rifle.
When it comes to sorry.
And I was going to say, but as far as the paperwork, they would have to have a valid license and a valid tag for the big game that they're hunting.
Do Fish and Wildlife hang out kind of at the trailheads of the major parks, the Capitol Forest or things like that, and wait for folks to come in so they can check those things before they go out? Or is it just kind of, we're here and we see you here now, so we'll look at what you have going on?
We run those, our patrols vary. And the sheriff was talking about manpower. I have Thurston Mason County.
Okay.
I have 3 officers in Thurston and 2 in Mason. So my manpower is, I would say, would be short.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of country to cover with those folks if you start talking about, your days off and things like that. So we do generally, the local officer knows his area.
Okay.
And they're expected to know their area. They know where the populations of game are going to be, the more likelihood that's where the majority of folks are going to be. So they'll concentrate early on in the seasons in those areas where we know we'll have high numbers of people. As calls for service come in, that may change their priority. We may be getting a lot of trespass while hunting complaints over here, so they'll move accordingly or spend their time accordingly as the calls come in. Now, as far as check stations and hanging out at, say, trailheads or road systems, we do run what we call hunter check stations, where it's a mandatory, stop, and we go through all of our inspections of license tags, game. We don't run those a lot because they're take a lot of manpower.
Sure.
You want to at least have 2-3 folks running those. Well, that's half my staff.
Yeah.
And so we will run check stations, but they generally they're out in the field moving. We're putting on a lot of miles this time of year.
Jeff, I think another thing that it helps is that a lot of people don't understand. It's just, again, I always say, we're thin for the number of calls we have too, and our agencies work very, very closely. If there's not a wildlife agent close, oftentimes we can make contact, wait for a wildlife agent. I would also point out that in the last couple of years, particularly one year on the 4th of July, we had a SWAT call out, and we were running a little thin on the 4th covering all the calls for service, and the wildlife agents came out and helped us on that call out, and within that same day we had a water safety related issue up on the Hood Canal, and those agents, along with the game wardens, along with the tribal police there, and a couple of our officers, were able to go out and in Puget Sound with a conglomeration of equipment, putting everything together to go out and save some people's lives out there. So we work really closely. Sergeant Fairbanks and Sergeant Jackson will be giving a presentation this month for our law enforcement breakfast for officers, and they'll go over some things that they may look for in. Ask us to be some eyes on for things, some areas that they look for, specialty things. A number of years ago, Sergeant McAvaney, before he retired, did a presentation for us and gave us an update on some things that had to do with fisheries issues with clams and oysters and shellfish industry. And within a week, one of the things that he said to be looking for, I drove by a vehicle that had shellfish products on it, and immediately, drew my attention to it that it didn't have the necessary bagging and those kind of things that he had explained to us, and we were able to make a contact on it. And it was a pretty big case. But
How old is your dog?
They're more specialized in those areas of wildlife.
Well, we're just about out of time here this morning, but we have Mason County Sheriff Casey Salisbury and Brian Fairbanks from Fish and Wildlife here this morning talking about hunting and other issues here on the morning show. And again, that breakfast coming up, and we'll have this interview on the Daybreak page after I get off the air here. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.